Hello everyone and welcome. My name's Karen Doyle and I'm Operations Director of CTAM Europe. I hope you're all feeling well today and are preparing for a great summer ahead. Sadly, this is our last webinar today until September. We've decided that our presenters have worked hard over the year, so we're going to give them a rest over summer. We'll be back in September with a great lineup and we'll email it to you very soon. I'd like to introduce you to today's webinar presenter, Jack Davison. Jack is Executive Vice President of 3Vision. I'm sure many of you know him already, and 3Vision are a leading international content consultancy. Jack is a regular of ours for webinars and also as a speaker or a panelist at our live events, which hopefully will start happening again soon. Today, Jack will be presenting on the changing market for US content distribution. The presentation is due to last around 30 minutes and we'll have time for a good Q&A session at the end. Please post your questions by using the Q&A button and Jack will do his best to answer them at the end. So sit back and enjoy, and I'll now hand you over to Jack. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. Extend Karen's welcome to today's webinar. As Karen introduced me, I am Jack Davison, EVP at 3Vision. Today's session is a quick dive into the market for US programming around the world. We have to give specific consideration, obviously, for the conditions we find ourselves in now following the COVID-19 pandemic. And yes, we'll take questions at the end. You put those, as Karen said, through the Q&A tool. And if you're watching us on demand or thinking of something later, please feel free to reach out to us by all the usual channels. There are emails at the end of the deck. I won't spend any time on 3Vision, which is, we're just simply speaking, a content consultancy supporting businesses across the sector. But what I will do is just make a quick reference point to where some of the data points come from today, as that will be probably a question that hangs if I don't explain it. We've been operating Show Tracker now for 4 years. It's a syndicated research product, and it's basically data that tracks the distribution of US and European shows in 14 global markets and provides some insight into how markets are changing and what activity there is. In various analysis in the coming slides, we'll use this data to look at some of the trends. But if there's anything there you'd like further clarity on, and on just the Show Tracker service itself, please reach out. But onward to today's session. The US remains uniquely placed in the world of television, and despite undergoing massive change, it still remains a dominant force in global television, featuring in the schedules and now I guess the on-demand inventories across the world, both through owned services and local operations. Historically, the roots of this stem from the very earliest stages of the TV industry, and those of you who know me know that I like going back every now and then just to see where we are now. TV obviously started in the 40s, held back globally by the war, and it was the US who emerged fastest out of the 40s, with the first commercial in 41, cable TV in 48, and colour in 50s. But the 50s was when TV started to take over homes. There were 10% of TV households with TVs at the start of the decade. There was 90 by the end. But for reference, actually, in the UK, that was at 67% by the end of the decade, just maybe reflecting the US speed out of the blocks. But US audiences grew very quickly, and the number of domestic independent stations across what was and still is a geographically very large market grew, and the need for content grew. The major US networks took hold quite quickly and dominated the market with volumes of content that they could syndicate. Coupled with that, there was also a growing international market as news stations, in particular independent stations, not state-owned ones, and the global market for US programming appeared pretty quickly. Here in the UK, ITV launched in the mid-50s with a lot of US shows, and the global market for exports started as early as the mid-50s, really, with CBS, NBC, ABC, all exporting. And as production costs rose for the networks, this was important. The basic model was established. And what I find fascinating when I was looking at this was actually shows were in deficit, had a financial deficit, even at this early stage. This wasn't something that came later. It was very much there at the beginning. and producers were looking to make up budget deficits from domestic and international secondary markets, and so these markets were born. In the 50s, it was largely westerns, but westerns dominated, and in 58, I think 8 of the top 10 TV shows were westerns. But also you had everything from Dragnet, I Love Lucy, Wagon Train. They all found sales and popularity in the UK and other markets. Perry Mason won the most popular overseas drama in Australia in 59. Bonanza was a huge hit in the 60s. Then we start seeing more names that enter the consciousness of some of us today, dating me, unfortunately, but the likes of the Hawaii Five-O's, the Kojaks, etc., all help to increase the presence of US programming overseas. There's plenty more to discuss in another forum here about the cultural impact of shows, the moments and the sort of societal focus points that began to be addressed more in TV. But suffice to say, the shows grew in significance and success. And I think probably in the UK, Dallas perhaps shows the signs of things to come, being a huge rating success for the BBC in 78, with over 20 million viewers. In 85, the BBC refused to pay $60,000 an episode, which was the asking price for the next series. And there was maybe a sign of it makes us laugh. I think ITV stepped in and met the price. But after huge furore, threats, political involvement, and lots of complaints, the regulator forced what was then Thames Television to back down and sell it to the BBC, where the BBC continued until 91. But in the 90s, we had the ERs, Seinfeld, Friends, The Simpsons, all starting to dominate ratings overseas. HBO started high-end TV drama with The Sopranos, and during the 90s, developed a very strong reputation for their sort of high-quality programming. But as we moved into the noughties, kind of there's more shows you see here, more formats, became more significant export for the US. But things were going to get a lot more complicated for the US. But actually, the growth of the market for US TV boomed. As the production and distribution in the US grew, so did the need for the forums and markets that we all know about. Although I guess it's hard to remember in the current climate, but it's not precise. But in 1963, it's arguably when the screenings started, the LA screenings. The Canadians were first to come to LA in 63. In 64, the Latin American executives came. British arrived in 67 with BBC and ITV. Then there was Australians, the Japanese, I think were fifth in 72. And then they moved to May in 1978. But by 1983, the screenings were serving around 200 buyers. This jumped to 450 buyers in 87 from about 55 countries, with about 80 companies selling. But in 2018, there were 1,500 buyers from 70 countries. And at the same time, with the screenings, we had NatP, we had MIP-TV. NatP emerged first due to the challenges coming out from government intervention, with the program directors at the local US stations to try and have a forum to resolve problems. But it was encouraged by the syndicated program salesmen, and this has grown to what we know NatP is today. MIP arrived in 63. It was actually in Lyon first, but moved quite quickly to Cannes. The first one was attended by 119 companies in 19 countries, and now, albeit it has its challenges, it does, and albeit the data is somewhat, you could question maybe a bit more, buyers have hit the number of 4,000 and more recently 3,300, with over 100 countries attending. And although it's tricky to find one single source for numbers, the US is undeniably the largest exporter of content in the world by a long way. It's even with the complications of data, you can see kind of the kind of export revenues from TV and films in the US fluctuated around $16 billion a year, with the surplus being about 12 billion, which is a significantly high number. And in terms of kind of surplus, it's much higher than a lot of US industries. Not so closely behind is followed by the UK, which annually reported trade of over $1 billion for the 18-19 financial year. And after that, it gets a bit trickier, with different bodies and different ministries stating levels with no real clarity as to the methodology. But France and Australia have always been up in the top 5 or so markets, along with the Netherlands, who are not listed here, due to kind of unreliability of data. But they are, they're the sixth largest EU economy, but they fight well above their weight in TV exports, especially thanks to their kind of historical performance with formats. And they're estimated roughly to fit in around that third, fourth level on that chart. But others do continue to grow and rise up. Obviously, kind of Turkey has had a boom time with a lot of their content, and Israel as well has done well. But we've seen lots of change over the last 10 years in the way, not just kind of, in the way we live, work and consume all forms of content. And US content distribution has seen massive change in that 10 years. The internet's overtaken traditional TV and advertising, and apart from 2010, it's consistently outgrown TV in terms of advertising. And I know we're going to have a huge amount of time to look at the impacts of COVID-19, but there are signs it's probably going to hurt TV deeper and longer than the internet. Just looking at Netflix alone, you can see in growth terms how they've overtaken pay TV in annual subscriber growth terms. It's pretty blunt data point, but it's a pretty telling one. More generally and more qualitatively in global markets, we all know that US TV has had some challenges as local markets have basically prioritized their own productions and to some extent different genres of shows. Pricing has been under pressure, content has been pushed into less or worse time slots on free TV and marginalized, but the market still remains and more services are launching. Within the last 10 years, we've seen strategic change and things going one way only to change back again. And SVOD is one of the things that's changed the market in so many ways, increasing the value and attention given to the utilization of rights and reshaping the ultimate financing of shows as there are new producers, new production partners, new co-financiers, new distributors. And I mean, Netflix emerged in the US as a secondary market earlier than previous syndication options. And was a kind of great boom for a while. They provided then kind of regional, then global options, moved from second window buyers to first window buyers. But then with their strength and increase in originals, the sales opportunities for distributors for just selling finished shows slacked off. It's not a boom and bust cycle for licenses, but it is change all the time. And there's been no end of change in lots of different ways. Perhaps a fitting entrance to the decade was that Blockbuster went bankrupt. And arguably, technical advancements, perhaps not as significant. I think there were foundations laid and huge changes in depth and quality, but maybe not one single thing. iPad did launch, as did UHD, and the last VHS was made. But overall, there are many other varied and key themes. Pay TV launched TV everywhere at the start of the decade, but at the end of the decade, they're increasingly breaking that walled garden and going OTT and changing the way their big bundle and their premium services are sold. Local SVOD services launched, virtual pay TV, a new generation of super aggregators like Apple, Roku, Amazon. Free TV, very much focused now on diversifying revenues away from traditional advertising. Targeted advertising, another initiative, AVOD, new producers like Sky, Viaplay, Movistar, Apple, Facebook, Snapchat, the list goes on. But new cooperations as well. Frenemies getting together, most notably with SVOD appearing on pay TV services, but also with broadcasters joining up. Media consolidation at the end of the decade, changing business models, D2C launches. It's hard to there's so many things. It's hard to underplay the influence of Netflix. They killed off Blockbuster at the start and then started their international rollout in 2010. Began producing, started winning Emmy nominations, and then integrated into first pay TV box in 2013. So they played obviously a huge role, and they've been moving into different types of programming, whilst also Amazon have begun playing a role in the sports market with entrance into key, not just sport, but key national pastimes, the NFL in the US, the Premier League in the UK. But we've seen huge growth. This is much used, obviously, much talked about. We've seen huge growth in production volumes as competition has grown. Volumes alone in the US up 150% since 2010. And with that, the budgets have also increased and the overall spend. Netflix get the headlines, but they're not alone in their production growth and their production spend. Other international activity has also been extensive. Pay TV and SVOD operators investing, especially in drama, increasing spend and output, and sometimes with US partners. Free TV changes are a bit more nuanced. Local increasingly important across all genres, but scripted drama spend also up. Just in the UK, shows qualifying for higher end tax relief, which basically means more than £1.5 million an hour, have grown 270% in the last 6 years. But again, plenty of those are with US partners. Back in 2017-18, Sky underwrote the production of Britannia with a £37 million budget. That equated to about £4.1 million an hour, net 3.4 after tax credits. Although that wasn't the first, this is previously kind of unheard of levels of investment for a pay TV operator out of the UK. But for them, the rationale was clear. They were looking for security of supply, better rights, a growing kind of global demand for high quality TV meant that they could get participation in the back end. And early projections of their own had that 3.4 million per hour budget reducing to a 1.4 million cost per hour to Sky as they brought on Amazon for sales in the US, and Sky Vision secured other international sales, showing the rationale. But really simply, and what this data shows is services still keep premiering US shows outside of the US. Across these 6 European markets, you can see this very straightforward cumulative growth of US show premiere. So this doesn't include any returning shows. This is just the first season and the first window of new season shows each year premiering in these markets. Things have changed over the years for US shows, and I think some would think that logically it wouldn't look so constant and straight in terms of growth, but given that there were fewer output deals, fewer life of series deals, less volume on free TV, some worse slots and lower viewing, but consistently the shows are still finding a home. And more recently, the change is more in a structural sense. This chart shows how the share of acquisitions has evolved over the last 3 complete TV seasons. Pay TV, you can see with the last complete TV season representing 43% of all the sales. You can see how critical it is, but equally the increasing importance of SVOD. You can see from these numbers the fairly quick and reduction in the kind of the Netflix and Amazon, which is what we mean by global SVOD here, how they drop off. But what you can also see is the growth of local SVOD. And this, we have to be careful when we talk about local SVOD, and also we have to be careful because we have to look at all the markets having very different dynamics. So this is across all of those seasons where all the shows have gone in these 10 markets. And if you look across them at the premieres, you can see the variation by market. You can start to see how markets like Mexico and Poland remain exclusively kind of a pay TV environment, pretty much, with VOD a growing part of them. Sweden has become a market where premieres are kind of increasingly almost exclusively on demand. And whilst others remain a bit more of a mixed economy for programming, you can see a direction of change. And you have to be careful because you have to look at everything very locally. In fact, that Poland number is a bit of a misdirection, as you can see a large proportion of Poland is a local SVOD, but that is a lot of that is HBO Go premiering shows on the HBO Go service and not on the channel. So you do have to go behind the numbers a little bit, but nonetheless, the direction of change is true. And in fact, it's useful just to look at that local and global SVOD change. You can see in these markets universal growth in the local SVOD's share of premieres, with a market like Germany up to 29% for the most recent new season shows. Meanwhile, kind of Netflix and Amazon have dropped off pretty much everywhere in share last season, given their focus on originals. But as with all data points, you do need to dig further to uncover more realities. And whilst this shows the growth of SVOD, local SVOD, it doesn't tell the whole story, and it describes a bit what's going on. And I just pull out Germany as a good example of that. As the current local players are responding to changes in the market, they're evolving their propositions and they're changing their content needs, and they're becoming a different sort of customer for the US studios, with different needs and different opportunities. At first glance, the German market looks like it's shifting a lot to SVOD services, but actually, when you look into the detail, kind of on the table on the right, whilst the pink kind of shows are being premiered in local SVOD, actually they are part of the greater kind of ProSieben and RTL's businesses, the free TV group kind of buyers who are driving their own SVOD tiers and shifting US acquisitions to digital first. And kind of the local and traditional players fighting back is obviously a big theme, and it's contributed to the changing market for programming and a lot of the issues in that market. Windowing is increasingly hard to balance as broadcasters offer more accessibility and usability around their offer. Enhancing catch-up means that the downstream value of content in any future windows is potentially reduced, and some reluctance to innovate does pull down these numbers in some markets, but the trends still show big growth. And it's important because at its core is one of the fundamentals to the complexity of ultimate revenue profiles of TV shows, because it contributes greatly to the overall window challenge. The last 2 or 3 years has seen almost a new category of sale come to market, which is a post-SVOD second window deal. We've seen swings throughout the decade, and even now we feel equilibrium of any sort hasn't been reached. There's many different views as to the value and outright acceptance in the market for broadcasting a show after SVOD, with many different considerations that all vary by different markets. Whilst broadcasters will be wary of the value of a show that's already been and is likely to be still available on Netflix or Amazon, certain key titles like Bodyguard and American Gods obviously have had an appeal broad enough to find success on broadcast after SVOD, with second window deals in all the markets indicated here. For some of these titles, it's not simply an experiment for one season, with broadcasters in France like Canal and Canada with Super Channel returning to air the second season of American Gods. Mediaset in Italy have aired all 3 seasons of Shooter after Netflix on their free-to-air channel 20, and others are working out what works. But it is hugely varied, and as more shows come out of SVOD holdback, there continues to be a lot of experimentation that has distributors still working out what the ultimate value of a show is. But what is, I guess, indisputable is the first window represents much more of the value in that ultimate revenue profile. Just looking at the aggregate picture in selected markets, you can see the variation. And here we've also highlighted one of the issues, which is why I put this up here. Germany leads with the most second windows after global SVOD here, with RTL being one of the channels, and they're taking 5 titles. But typically, broadcasters following SVOD are unable to get stacking rights, and to ensure they can't compete with that SVOD player who still has the content on their VOD service. And so therefore, the broadcasters who are working with this and are trying these second windows, they have scheduled it, but as you can see from these shares, none of them are offering enhanced catch-up rights, which goes against the trend that we've already talked about. They are trying various unorthodox scheduling, airing multiple episodes a week or sometimes a day in order to take advantage of a straightforward 30-day catch-up and put an entire season on its catch-up service, if only for a short time, but some of those loopholes will be closed. And people like Canal have done that with American Gods, Tele5 in Germany with Relic, and 5 Star in the UK with Riverdale. But the rapid change of broadcast propositions is also key to this environment that's changing. As we showed, kind of their usage their enhancement of services is growing, and this includes what is increasingly termed BVOD, which is basically AVOD by broadcasters. It's seeing very strong revenue growth, albeit from a low level, and it's strengthened by the dynamics of the ad sale market and the broadcasters' existing position in that market. AVOD may well be at the top of the height curve, slipping slightly as a consequence of the pandemic, but it has seen very strong revenue growth in the US, and a sector that many people were nervous about for years is now delivering revenues and finding a place in the rights ecosystem. But as it spreads globally, it remains to be seen how the major players will address it, and how the balance between the different types of AVOD work out, with the likes of Tubi, Pluto, Roku, others rolling out to different markets. And it's with BVOD that we're seeing premieres and second windows for scripted TV growth. With AVOD at the moment is sticking to what they can do best and what their model can afford with archive and library rights right now. But as those two rights of free TV and AVOD butt up against each other, it will be very interesting to watch. It's likely that it's going to be a while, we would say, before competition for new season content is on one of these pure play AVOD services. But the broadcaster-based BVOD services are certainly playing a role. So I think kind of one of the last themes we'd like to talk about is how strategically over the end of the decade, probably one of the biggest shifts in the distribution market for content was the launch of D2C services. D2C is not new, with studios having launched numerous pay TV channels internationally from as early as the 80s as pay TV began to roll out. But as the D2C efforts have grown in size and significance, its influence on the market for programming is greater. Each studio's activity varies, some resisting new D2C efforts, some with more plans, and others launch, but the implications for sales not so clear-cut to third parties. This chart shows the proportion of sales by studios to their own services. It looks at it across multiple markets as well. And you'd be mistaken to think that the D2C initiatives have meant that studios have shut up shop in terms of selling content to third parties. You can see here, kind of in terms of the blue, that's how much they're selling. They continue to sell to third parties. But this is something that will be key to follow, as there is definitely a shift. It's only with Lionsgate, who operate Starz Play, you see an almost complete withdrawal from third-party sales. MGM have no significant services on their own internationally. Sony are very, very, very limited. But either through existing output deals, new deals, where third-party values are too high to ignore, like HBO, or possibly timing with their own service rollouts, there's still a mixed market for sales. The data is showing some signs of Warner and Disney increasingly internalizing sales, but actually what you really need to do is to look at it at a local level, as local conditions is what probably determines, can vary and determines the mix you see here. Looking at it the other way around, you can see the importance of studio-operated services in the international market. This is just 2019 shows, and this is showing you who the top buyers are in Europe for those shows. And the studios themselves are the top buyers, having for many years been operating their channel groups. Whilst local services are acquiring content, cross-territory channel groups owned by US studios play a huge role. For some of these groups, however, a large proportion of their acquisitions also come from their own distributors engaged in vertical integration, which you can see here with the red. So you can see the proportion they get from their own businesses, and the blue being third parties. And you can see how Warner and NBC dominate in terms of buying US programming. Warner Media Services include the former Turner channels and the very prolific HBO local services in Spain and Sweden, and Spain and Scandinavia. But over half the content appearing on these services come from Warner Brothers distribution, but then also half don't. NBC Universal sits in a distant second, with big brand channels such as Sci-Fi often going to third-party services, third-party distributors for content that fits within its genres, and the Sky channels taking a large amount of Warner HBO shows for Sky Atlantic across the UK, Germany and Italy. But local channel groups in France and the UK feature, with Canal, the most prolific of local buyers, OCS, majority owned by Orange, also featuring. And if you remove the buyers themselves, the ranks change significantly. Warner Media falls into second place behind NBC, and more local buyers surface from Italy with Mediaset, Sweden with NENT, and Spain with Telefonica, as the major US studios such as Disney fall out of the top 10. Moving on, and just before we wrap up, it's worth taking a quick look ahead at what some of the production delays may mean. Although resumed in some way, with much of the US production coming to a halt in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, international services relying on US acquisitions are likely to suffer a deficit in their planned programming this autumn season, along with their own domestic production issues. This chart looks at the average number of premieres of full US season shows in the same season internationally, i.e. it means kind of new content straight from the US in these markets. And it could be seen, it could be a bellwether for what, where shortages of supply may impact more. The left-hand service chart suggests that broadcasts in Australia and Spain will have the largest deficit of content and may look to fill some of those gaps with library content or previously unsold titles in their regions, with Spain on average premiering 8 new season shows and 12 returning shows. Other broadcast channels in markets such as Sweden have lower levels of acquisitions, as it's the VOD services who take a larger proportion. And the right-hand side chart shows that in Sweden, it's the VOD services who are likely to suffer the biggest content deficit. Spain, with its own localized HBO service, also kind of comes up high in this analysis. And this suggests that a wide range of these services may need to reapproach distributors for older content. Global SVODs such as Netflix and Amazon, which is included in this data, have seen generally lower levels of US full season acquisitions year on year, because obviously with their own productions and notwithstanding their own original production issues, they were already expected to acquire less new content in 2020 from third-party distributors. It seems inevitable, whichever way you look, that all services will be looking to fill holes. Free TV will find it hard to rely on their own library and new productions, and they may need to look smartly at unsold US shows, and there are a lot of them, with their position probably the most fragile coming out of the pandemic as the ad market collapsed. Pay TV is equally kind of in a challenging position, usually riding out recessions well as people stop spend on more expensive items. They now face challenges from a different competitive environment and sports issues. But SVOD may be able to disguise these issues better, but Q4 2020 for many operators is likely going to be a very, very defensive one. This is a quick note just to validate the point I made about unsold content. There are huge volumes of content being produced, and a great deal remains unsold. In absolute terms, there's a very significant numbers. Almost 70% of the most recent season remained unsold in April, last time we ran the data. And that drops to 24% when you look back to the 2017 season. Italy leads in sheer volume terms with 197 shows unsold since 2016, but everyone has numbers. Some of those shows have multiple seasons, and they may be a target of services wanting to meet demands of the binge set culture. Across the big 5 Euro markets, there are over 20, there are about 24 US shows with 3 or more seasons committed, with the list much bigger for those with just more than one season. The unsold shows obviously skew to comedy and to non-renewed shows more, and that proves the old adage that comedy doesn't necessarily travel so well. But it raises the question of how much pragmatism may come from broadcasters willing to compromise on kind of those creative visions they have. So that's it. I'll look to the Q&A to see what there is. I think I've gone slightly longer than expected, but if there are, I'll have just call up the Q&A right now and just see the questions. So, what would you say is the most surprising or unexpected territorial change in the take-up of US premiere content? Good question. Maybe I'll come back to that. I think I wonder what is the most surprising. I mean, I think there's a lot of markets that are quite impacted by the presence. I mean, when you just look at the data, a lot of anomalies come from the likes of Spain and Sweden because of the prolific nature of the likes of the HBO service they're licensing. And that does happen elsewhere. I think the speed of change maybe in Germany most recently with the broadcaster digital services probably has, whilst not unexpected, is probably maybe surprising to some extent. Um, let's see. NBCU came in for flack after taking high-profile content off its recently launched AVOD service very soon after launch. Is this a fair criticism? I would say yes. I don't think it's necessarily fair that you do get criticism for taking things off, but I think it's probably a slip up and poor management of the schedule. I think you in the digital services, which we know from talking to our clients, so there are still a lot of people learning about the scheduling of non-linear services, which it's not a misnomer. You have to do it, and it's important. And if you launch a service only to quickly take something off, that is probably not the best planning, and you should expect a little bit of flack from the consumers. Talk about the value of library content. I'm hearing that Disney Plus viewership of The Simpsons on demand is huge at lower cost. Does library content cannibalize premiere content? I don't. Well, take this one by one. I think the right evergreen library has huge value, and I think that's testament in the deals for Friends, The Office, and all of the different big kind of global Seinfeld in the US, the big deals that happen with the new streamers. So and I know we know from the data that with the limited data we see from the likes of Netflix that the library can do very well. It may well cannibalize kind of premiere content in terms of if people are making a decision in terms of what they view, but I don't think that's a problem. I think the viewing kind of ecosystem for SVOD players, they want to get the money, they want to get a return on their investment when they're making these big budget shows, and I don't think they need to worry too much about the competition in the schedules in the same way as we always used to with TV. I think it could become a problem. Well, it could become more of a challenge in terms of how you manage your schedule, but there is no doubt that library has huge value, and we know that. I mean, I think all the distributors out there right now, those with deep libraries, have been busy during the pandemic with lots of services, in particular broadcasters, coming back to them for that library. Okay, let's see. The main issue I see going forward is the pressure on audience wallets due to the pandemic, which might give free content a new lease of life. What's your view on this? Yes, I think so. I mean, I think let's take the pandemic is undoubtedly contributing to some level of global recession that will probably, obviously different markets will bounce back at a different rate. And I think the competitive landscape for TV services is totally different than when we had any other global recession, and this global recession is likely to take a form of none we've seen before. So I think competition for spend is going to be even more significant, and so what that means for free TV, I think the broadcasters are facing the change they were facing anyway has sped up and accelerated, and I think that acceleration is not temporary. I think the one thing the pandemic has done is increase the speed of change in the same direction for free TV, and if they can innovate and use the strength in the position they have now to grow their digital services, then you would hope that they would see some benefits, and you would expect to see a growth in free TV viewing. And with that, you've also got the AVOD guys. But I don't think, I still think, I guess it's very market by market. I think the competition for spend, there's still spend there. And I think some markets, there's still the affordability of pay TV with SVOD layer on top is still there. But that's obviously not true in every. Is there a silver lining in the COVID pandemic? Well, that's a sort of philosophical question, maybe. For smaller distributors with a decent library of decent content, might now be facing a warmer welcome from SVODs? Yes, absolutely. And we've had multiple conversations over the last sort of 12 weeks where this has been the case, without a doubt, that those with deep, long libraries are seeing a good time. And I think even to the extent, I would say that I'd be fairly confident in saying that distributors with a deep library will have a pretty good. I think they'll have a pretty good financial year. I mean, I think to that extent, I think it will offset kind of some of the other problems they may have had. Those who don't and who've had kind of production delays blow a big hole in the cash flow. Obviously, it's hard for them, but there may be some positive sides to it from that point of view. Do I have any data on piracy trends? I'm afraid I don't. Over the years, we have picked it out every now and then, but not, and we're not sure. I'm sure there is data out there. We've never found it hugely reliable. Some of the stuff we have, and we do know some, but it's still. Let's not forget about it. It's easy to forget about it because of the prevalence of legitimate content and the increasing usage of legitimate content. Piracy is still a big issue. I think it will probably grow as an issue in the short term, and that's because I think there's probably a whole another issue and discussion here. But premium kind of pre anything else release of movies on VOD, whether it be a short term pragmatic or tactical piece of work by Disney Plus, or whether it be a Netflix or an Amazon coming in early and buying out a movie's theatrical window. I don't think there's a huge, over the years everyone talks about premium TVOD and so on. I don't think there's a huge movement to that, but as we do see more of these tactical releases and things like Hamilton on Disney Plus, this can only make piracy even more of a discussion point. I mean, you can just see from Disney. Disney Plus dropped their free period window just before Hamilton came out, because they know the value of releasing Hamilton straight away on Disney Plus, and they're not going to let people use a free preview to watch it. Equally, they're going to make as many efforts as possible to prevent the pirates from doing anything to devalue that release as well. I think that is it for questions. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A. But thank you all for oh, here we go, one more. Thank you all for your time. Regarding unsold shows, how do they relate to piracy? It would seem to me that lots of shows pirated must be ones people can't find. What's the cost of this? I don't know. You know, I've never asked that question. I mean, it would be interesting. I mean, if you could probably look at the torrent data and see in the torrent data, country by country, actually, where shows feature high that have been unsold. I don't have any idea what the data shows, but I wouldn't be surprised if the pirates are still primarily pirating the stuff that's big in their own market. I think it's still stuff they know about, that people are marketing, that they're aware about. But that is hand in the air. That's a total guess. But yeah, you know. Yeah, so I think that's it. Thank you all for your time, and I imagine a lot of you are probably off on holiday soon. But obviously, we love the opportunity to do these. They are unparalleled times, we feel, going into COVID-19 pandemic and going into lockdown, things were changing so much in our industry anyway. These troubling times are kind of definitely an accelerator, in many ways in the direction of change, as we said. But if there are any more questions that pop up or anything afterwards, do reach out. And Karen, thanks a lot again.
Jack, thank you. It was really interesting. And one of the earlier slides reminded me of my love for Dallas when I was a child. My dream was to live at South Fork Ranch. So I might have to check that out again now. And can I just ask one quick question? I just wanted to know who you would say are the winners or the losers in popular genres recently, and which distributors or networks are achieving the biggest sales?
Oh, wow. I'm not sure about the second one. I mean, there is the short term kind of library boom. Apart that aside, I think there is obviously the different studios, the US studios. They obviously exert a lot of pressure and when they have the leverage, and in some cases they might use the film business to do that, and in other cases they might have some form of other TV vehicle that helps them do that. But I don't think I can really comment on. I'm not sure I can comment on which ones are particularly doing well at the moment. It is very much a lot of the usual suspects. So I don't think there's been a huge shift there. And what was your first question? It was, sorry.
The question is just who would you say the winners or the losers in the popular genres recently have been?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I guess, but if you permit me to ignore kind of the shiny floor entertainment kind of local reality shows, I mean, I'm only ignoring them, not because they're not important and they aren't still winners, but if we take those out of the equation, it's still, I mean, it's still kind of solid drama, really. I mean, it kind of drama is still it's still in there. If I remember my data, which we didn't have in that thing, kind of crime drama, crime still pays in TV terms. But I don't think that's anything earth-breaking or new, to be honest. I think that is still one of the stronger genres.
Yeah, that's the one I suspected you might think. Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. That was a fabulous Q&A session just to end the webinar series as well for summer. If you need to view this presentation again, this one will be uploaded again on the members only section of ctameurope.com, and all the past webinars and podcasts are on there from CTAM Europe and also CTAM US. Jack's done a couple of webinars for us during lockdown, so if you've missed them, you might want to catch up on those because they're always fabulous as this one. So thanks again, Jack. I've really enjoyed it, and thanks everyone for joining in. Enjoy your summer and have a great week.
You too.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.